Hello, my name's Debbie Chalice. I'm the Education and Outreach Officer at LSE Library, and I'm going to talk to you today about Emily Wilding Davison. She worked as a paid organiser for the Women's Social and Political Union from about 1910. This is mainly because she can get paid work because of her militant action. There is a photograph of Cicely Hale at the back, and as you look at the photograph to the right of it, there is Davison head bent over some paper writing away. She was essentially a writer towards the end of her life, but she didn't actually get so much published. Now, Cicely Hale, who knew Davison quite well and she worked with her, described her as a smouldering flame.
She was a smouldering flame. You never knew what was going to happen next.
Both Hale and her sister, Beatrice Ricardo, who were members of the WSPU, they both described her as a fanatic.
Same as the way as it would connect the fanatics. Of course, in every movement of that sort, there are fanatics. Emily Davison was a fanatic.
Now, Davison decided to do a dramatic action. What she actually did was to try and pin a flag onto the King's Horse at the Epsom Derby in June 1913. Now, basically, she was very ill for a day or so after she jumped in front of the King's Horse. It was a massively publicised action, and then she died a few days later. After she died, there was a coroner's inquest, which there always is for death that could be suicide, accident, murder, whatever. And the coroner's verdict was actually death due to misadventure. So it wasn't suicide. It wasn't accidental death. It was death due to misadventure. We don't know the motivations, as I say, and they're still commented on today. But that brings me to the repercussions of this. Now, Cicely Hale and some of the other suffragettes have spoken years later about the fact that they didn't think the Pankhurst, they certainly didn't know about it. Nobody else seemed to know what was going to happen. They didn't approve of it, but they took advantage of the publicity that it afforded the movement and created Davison into a martyr, into somebody who's willing to lay down her life for the cause of women's votes. So Grace Roe, who was one of the organisers of the Women's Social and Political Union, and Christabel Pankhurst, one of her close friends, organised the funeral for Emily Wilding Davison while she was actually, in fact, on the run herself. As she describes in her oral history interview, the difficulties of organising this funeral. At first, she couldn't find a clergyman to take it or a church that would do it. In the end, she managed to, and you can hear her to talk about that. And then she only had a short amount of time to plan for the actual funeral. But Grace Roe was an artist by training, and she put that into good use, to put that idea of pageantry that the suffragettes had developed so well, and the iconography that they used, into good use for Davison's funeral.
A good idea, putting as what they're calling it. I thought, well, what will they have to dress? Some people won't have white, others will want. And there's a white and a black group and a white group. You see, so that it was very well coordinated in that way.
Postcards of Rosa May Billinghurst, who was one of the suffragettes, and also used a wheelchair, so you can often find her, and she's wearing white and in the procession. There's an order of ceremony. Davison's references, her references from university are sort of given out. The front cover of the Suffragettes depicts Davison, or an angel basically, and depicts her very much as a kind of Joan of Arc stroke angel martyr for the cause. And this, of course, got a lot of publicity, and there is in fact footage of the funeral too. And it has a significant impact in terms of showing the lengths to which women would go to for the votes, but also showing the violence of not just their militancy, but arguably of the state against the suffragettes. And Sylvia Pankhurst later gives a speech shortly after in Limehouse, and she's then arrested for incitement, but she says, "It was said that until a woman could be found to lay down her life for it, this cause would never be won. Emily Wilding Davison has given her life for it. She threw herself into the midst of racehorses and was battered to death. Just think what that means. Is it not strange that when a woman has done that in order to call attention to the unrest amongst women and the great desire amongst women to share in the government of the country, is it not strange that there should not have been one man in Parliament who would have thought it necessary to bring the question up in order that Parliament might discuss it? Why should not the government, why should not Parliament bring this struggle for votes for women to an end?" And as late as 1914, just before the outbreak of the First World War, in May, there's a massive demonstration at Buckingham Palace, and some of the images that you've just seen were from police removing suffragettes from that demonstration. Davison's legacy was still there, and her friend Mary Lee, whose lawyer husband actually represented the family at the coroner's verdict, would visit Emily's grave in Morpeth every year. She took one of the flags, and this is the flag that we have in our collection at LSE, and she actually carried it on the first Aldermaston March for C&D, the Ban the Bomb March in 1958. So there was an activist legacy long after Emily Wilding Davison's death, and she is the suffragette that a lot of people remember.